What if the most celebrated fortress on the Eastern Front rested on little more than clay and hope? Chasiv Yar, hailed in Kyiv and Brussels as the Eastern Fortress, was not merely a town. It stood as the last substantial Ukrainian bastion, shielding the gateway to the Donbas. If it fell, the road to Konstantinivka and the heart of Ukraine's eastern defenses would lie open. This was no makeshift garrison. Elite brigades, scarred yet unbroken by relentless combat, stood guard behind layers of territorial defense units. Months of frantic engineering had shaped the landscape into a tangled maze of bunkers, minefields, and concrete bunkers. To analysts and politicians alike, it seemed impenetrable, a stronghold built to shatter any assault. But beneath the concrete and bravado, unseen cracks widened. Commanders fell into the trap of overconfidence, clinging to blueprints and imported doctrines while ignoring the land's unique demands. The entire defense, for all its strength, rested on just two lifelines: narrow supply roads, easily targeted, easily severed. Exhaustion gnawed at the defenders. After months of ceaseless fighting and mounting casualties, even the best formations were frayed. Fresh reinforcements arrived unprepared and untested. Experienced leaders hesitated, paralyzed by distant headquarters and conflicting orders. Morale withered, and hesitation proved fatal as the tempo of battle quickened. When the attack came, it crashed through the fortress like a tidal wave. The so-called impenetrable defense collapsed in mere days. Supporters watched in disbelief. Even adversaries were stunned by the speed and scale of the unraveling. How could such a mighty position disintegrate so quickly? The answer is uncomfortable and essential. The fall of Chasiv Yar exposes harsh truths about the realities of modern war. Superior tactics, technology, and psychological warfare can shatter myths and fortresses alike. Mistaking legend for reality costs lives, reputations, and sometimes entire campaigns. The lessons of Chasiv Yar echo far beyond this battle, forcing us to reconsider how we build, defend, and believe in fortresses in an age defined by information and innovation. To grasp what truly happened, we must first understand why Chasiv Yar mattered, and why its sudden fall changed everything. Only by tracing the origins of Chasiv Yar's reputation can we see how its defenders and their adversaries misjudged both its strength and its weaknesses. The myth began long before the first shells fell. On maps and in official reports, Chasiv Yar appeared unbreakable, a fortress designed to hold forever. But paper fortresses hide the fractures that matter most. For months, Ukrainian commanders and Western analysts alike referred to it as the Eastern Fortress. Its location was everything. Perched atop high ground, Chasiv Yar commanded the main road to Konstantinovka, the last major link to the sprawling defenses of Donbas. If this city fell, the enemy would gain a straight shot to the heart of Ukraine's resistance in the east. The defenders were no ordinary force. The 93rd Mechanized Brigade, seasoned in combat, formed the core. Multiple battalions, each with battle-tested reputations, joined them. Together, they presented what seemed an unbreakable wall, one that many believed would hold against any onslaught. Defenses ran deep: concrete bunkers, interlocking trenches, strongpoints, and belt after belt of minefields. Each position was mapped, every approach covered by overlapping arcs of fire. Months of labor and planning hardened these lines. It looked, on every schematic, like a defense that could not be cracked. Yet the very predictability of these strengths became their undoing. Overconfidence led to patterns, strong points placed at regular intervals, defensive layouts that ignored the subtle quirks of the land. Russian intelligence, patient and systematic, mapped every position. Doctrine became a roadmap for destruction. Logistics, the silent lifeline of any defense, were dangerously fragile. The entire cluster relied on two main supply roads from the west. Both were easily targeted by Russian artillery and drones. Once these arteries were severed, supplies dwindled and reinforcements stalled. The fortress became a trap. The human element was equally brittle. The 93rd, once elite, had been worn down by months of grinding combat. Veterans were lost, replaced by raw conscripts and exhausted reservists. New arrivals came with little training or will to fight. Weeks of shelling and constant attrition gnawed at morale, sapping the will to resist even before the enemy struck. Command and control, meant to bring order, instead brought hesitation. Adopting NATO doctrines, commanders centralized decisions. Orders flowed from above, but rarely arrived in time. Local leaders hesitated, waiting for instructions as crises unfolded. In a battle that demanded speed and adaptation, these delays proved deadly. Even the engineering marvels of Chasiv Yar's defense could not withstand modern weapons. Russian planners exploited gaps with heavy glide bombs, precision missiles, and relentless electronic warfare. The lines bent and broke under pressures they were never designed to face. What had seemed a perfect defense was, in truth, a giant with feet of clay. The dangers were massive. Clinging to the myth of invincibility meant that when the assault finally came, defeat might arrive with shocking speed, and consequences that would ripple across the entire region. But these vulnerabilities remained dormant until Russian forces decided to exploit them, using unexpected methods and unleashing the full power of modern war. With the stage set and the defenders blind to their real weaknesses, the Russians prepared to strike. The opening moves would reveal just how swiftly a fortress could fall when its enemies held every advantage. The assault on Chasiv Yar fortress did not begin with soldiers crossing no man's land. It began with paralysis and invisible hands, weeks before the first shot was fired. Russian planners orchestrated a campaign of information dominance. Their drones, signals teams, and human assets probed every seam, searching not only for strength, but for cracks that could be split wide open. The aim was a defeat that would unfold like falling dominoes. When the attack arrived, it swept in as a storm of fire. For 3 days and 3 nights, artillery and aircraft pounded not just trenches, but command centers, ammunition stores, and the few lifelines that sustained the garrison. The intention was not simply destruction, it was to sever coordination and leave defenders leaderless, long before infantry pressed forward. Yet the most devastating blow was silent. Russian electronic warfare blinded Ukrainian command. Satellite links, including those provided by Starlink, sputtered out. Drone feeds went black. Commanders, once confident in their digital networks, found only frozen screens and outdated maps, their vaunted NATO standard systems rendered useless. Inside the fortress, the isolation was suffocating. Trapped in bunkers, battered by endless detonations, defenders lost all sense of the wider battle. No orders, no news, no hope that reinforcements could break through, only the unbroken drumbeat of explosions and a growing certainty of abandonment. Morale fractured. Russian assault teams, small, agile groups of 5 to 7, slipped through breaches, guided by their own drones. They bypassed strongholds, isolating defenders or collapsing their rear lines before resistance could regroup. Instead of tanks leading the charge, Russian armor followed behind. Only when infantry had exposed weak points and thinned the lines did armored vehicles roll in, flipping the script and deepening confusion among the defenders. Every pillar of Ukrainian defense, fortifications, communications, logistics, was systematically unraveled. The once impenetrable fortress, designed for siege, was helpless against a modern, relentless assault. This battle sounded a dire warning. Without adaptation, even the strongest defenses become fatal traps in the age of new tactics and technology. As the fortress unraveled, the operation reached a point of no return. The encirclement began to close, sealing the fate of those trapped within. Now, with the ring tightening, every moment inside the fortress became a fight for survival. The final act of the battle was about to begin. Once the jaws began to close around Chasiv Yar, every lost hour stretched into a lifetime inside the trap. Russian forces struck from both the north and the south, slicing through Ukrainian lines and severing the 2 vital supply roads. Cut off from the outside, the defenders found themselves entirely encircled. No reinforcements arriving, no wounded or supplies escaping. Russian air and ground units moved in perfect concert. Each Ukrainian hesitation or misstep was instantly exploited by drones, artillery, or airstrikes. Even a brief delay in shifting defensive lines became a fatal weakness. Positions crumbled before orders could reach the front. Inside the shrinking enclave, panic spread like wildfire. Communication blackouts isolated commanders from their troops and from one another. Russian electronic warfare blinded Ukrainian drones and jammed their radios, sowing confusion and fear. What began as an organized defense quickly descended into chaos. Some units dug in and fought. Others tried to break out. None succeeded. Desperate attempts to escape or to relieve the garrison from outside met disaster. Waves of armored vehicles and infantry were obliterated by pre-sighted artillery and precision airstrikes. In a single day, the Ukrainians lost several dozen tanks and armored vehicles. The tally in lives was even grimmer. As the cauldron tightened, morale collapsed. Supplies dwindled, hope evaporated. Arguments erupted into mutiny. Enforced orders forbidding surrender came down from above, sometimes backed by the guns of punitive detachments. In scenes of tragedy, some soldiers tried to give up, only to be hunted by their own supposed allies. The psychological burden was crushing. By the time the final collapse arrived, resistance had shattered. In the battle's last hours, entire battalions surrendered together. Hundreds of exhausted, haunted soldiers raising their hands, leaving behind heaps of equipment, maps, and a fortress once hailed as unbreakable. This was far more than the loss of a position or a brigade. Refusing to adapt, clinging to denial or outdated orders, transformed a tactical setback into a strategic calamity, with enduring scars on morale and reputation. The fall of Chasiv Yar sent shockwaves far beyond the front line. In Kiev and Moscow alike, leaders scrambled to assess what the battle meant for the future of the war. True strength in war is never just concrete and steel. It is adaptability, clear thinking, and the drive to keep learning. The fall of Chasiv Yar is a brutal lesson. Today, victory hinges as much on information, morale, and logistics as it does on brute force. The legend of the unbreakable fortress did not collapse because the walls failed, but because the defenders' systems were outpaced and exposed in a fight that changed faster than they could adapt. Rigid command structures can be fatal. When every decision must climb to the very top, those on the ground are left waiting, paralyzed. At Chasiv Yar, this centralization bred deadly hesitation. Meanwhile, the attackers thrived on decentralized initiative, rapid communication, and frontline autonomy. Flexibility shattered formula. Technology can rewrite the odds. Sophisticated electronic warfare blinded the defenders, silenced their radios, and crippled their drones. Information vanished. Suddenly, even the most fortified positions stood alone, unable to coordinate. Their digital tablets became useless. Windows to the outside world snapped shut in an instant. Morale is not just a concept. It is a weapon. When defenders felt cut off, encircled and forgotten, psychological operations deepened their fear. Rumors, uncertainty, and the sense of abandonment did as much damage as shells or rockets. The defenders' confidence failed first in their minds, then on their lines. Refusing to adapt comes at a terrible price. Leaders who clung to old reputations or political stories, who delayed withdrawal orders, trapped their own best units. Stubbornness became a snare. Thousands paid with their lives, not for lack of skill, but for someone else's pride. Even elite soldiers break if denied hope and agency. Once cut off from command, supplies, and information, these formations unraveled, not from cowardice, but from isolation and paralysis. Courage alone is never enough. The verdict is stark. In modern war, or any critical struggle, success demands flexibility, brutal honesty, and the will to pivot before it is too late. Ignore these realities, and defeat turns into catastrophe, whether in battle, business, or politics. So what does Chasiv Yar teach about the future? What hard questions must every leader now ask as the next phase looms? The battle's aftermath is not just about lost ground, but about shifting mindsets and strategies. As the dust settles, the lessons of Chasiv Yar will shape every decision that follows. The collapse of a fortress is never just a tactical milestone. It is a reckoning for every leader and strategist, a reflection of deeper truths beneath the banners and barricades. Chasiv Yar's fall was never only about walls, trenches, or firepower. It exposed the illusions leaders build, how faith in fortifications and doctrine can breed complacency, and how overconfidence hides fatal flaws. Even the strongest fortress can prove fragile, crumbling with terrifying speed when its hidden weaknesses are revealed. This was not the slow, predictable war many anticipated. The operation at Chasiv Yar showcased how advanced combined arms tactics, overwhelming technology, and relentless psychological pressure can break even the most determined defense. Yet it also proved that morale, logistics, and adaptive command are as decisive as any weapon in the arsenal. The defenders were battered not just by shells and drones, but by isolation, confusion, and shattered communication. When leadership faltered and new threats struck from unexpected quarters, the resolve to resist wavered. All the world's weaponry means little if those who wield it cannot coordinate, adapt, and inspire. For any leader, military or civilian, the lesson is stark. Victory belongs to those who challenge their own myths, who recognize the limits of tradition, and who adapt under pressure. Systems built on rigid hierarchy or outdated beliefs are brittle, no matter how imposing they appear. For nations, the consequences run even deeper. In the age of information, every defeat and every triumph is amplified and dissected instantly. The reputations of armies, governments, and commanders can be transformed overnight, not just by what unfolds on the ground, but by how quickly they learn, change, and lead amid chaos. For all of us, the message endures. Security, resilience, and lasting success demand more than strong defenses or advanced tools. They require self-awareness, adaptability, and the courage to confront uncomfortable realities. Only those willing to see through comforting myths and respond to reality will shape the future, whether in war, in leadership, or in life itself. To ignore these lessons is to risk repeating old, costly mistakes, in battle, in business, or within our own choices. But let us not leave the story here. Let's dig even deeper into the roots and implications of this collapse, for the lessons of Chasiv Yar are not new, and echoes of its fate can be traced through centuries of military history. Consider the example of the Maginot Line, a vast fortress system built by France in the interwar period. Like Chasiv Yar, it was hailed as impregnable. Its concrete bunkers, thick walls, and deep trenches were supposed to shield France from German aggression. Yet, when World War II erupted, the Germans simply bypassed it through the Ardennes forest, an area that planners considered impassable. The Maginot Line, for all its might, failed spectacularly because its defenders invested in the myth of invincibility and ignored the possibility of surprise and adaptation. Or think of the Siegfried Line, constructed by Germany during the same period. Strong in appearance, with rows of dragon's teeth anti-tank obstacles and pillboxes, the line was breached when Allied forces found its weaknesses and exploited gaps. The physical structures remained imposing, but the psychological and logistical underpinnings were brittle. The Allies' command of air, fast-moving armor, and superior coordination turned the supposedly unbreakable into a footnote. In ancient times, the walls of Constantinople were considered the greatest defensive structure in Europe for 1,000 years. Yet in the year 1453, Mehmed the Conqueror brought cannons, then new technology, to bear, and the city fell after a siege of less than 2 months. The lesson was clear. No fortress is truly unassailable when new ideas, tools, or determination are arrayed against it. Chasiv Yar's fate follows this same tragic arc. Its defenders trusted in the strength of concrete and doctrine, just as ancient and modern commanders before them had. Yet, as with the Maginot Line, the Siegfried Line, and Constantinople, blind faith in fortifications led to disaster when the enemy changed the rules of the game. Let's break down the key factors with concrete examples and practical steps, drawing not only from Chasiv Yar, but from a broader sweep of history. First, logistics. At Stalingrad in World War II, the German Sixth Army was encircled because it relied on a slender supply corridor. When the Soviets severed this lifeline, the entire German force, numbering over 300,000, was doomed. Chasiv Yar's two roads were its Achilles heel. Any future defense must prioritize redundancy, multiple supply lines, stockpiled reserves, and rapid repair capabilities. This means not just building more roads, but developing alternative means of supply, such as drones for light cargo, or even tunneling to create hidden logistics corridors, as seen in the Syrian conflict. Second, command and control. In the Vietnam War, the North Vietnamese Army often used decentralized cells capable of independent action. This allowed them to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. In contrast, American units sometimes waited for orders from distant headquarters, resulting in missed opportunities and disasters like the Battle of Khe Sanh. Modern defenders must empower local commanders. This can be done through regular wargaming, scenario-based training, and a culture that rewards initiative rather than punishes deviation from the plan. Third, morale and psychological resilience. During the siege of Leningrad, Soviet citizens endured nearly 900 days of starvation and bombardment, yet held out because of a sense of shared purpose and constant communication from leadership, even under blackout conditions. At Chasiv Yar, isolation and the sense of abandonment accelerated collapse. To avoid this, militaries must invest in robust psychological operations that not only counter enemy propaganda, but also foster connection and hope within besieged units. This might include regular morale-boosting broadcasts, personal messages from families, and visible efforts to break the siege even when relief seems impossible. Fourth, adaptation to technology. In the Gulf War, coalition forces used electronic warfare to blind and confuse Iraqi air defenses, rendering their vaunted fortifications useless. At Chasiv Yar, Russian electronic warfare had similar effects. Defenders in the future must train for digital isolation, learning to operate with paper maps, prearranged signals, and local autonomy when the network goes down. Redundant analog systems and the ability to rapidly shift frequencies or encryptions are essential. Fifth, learning from failure. After the disastrous Dieppe raid in World War II, Allied planners analyzed every mistake, leading to innovations that made the D-Day landings a success. Chasiv Yar's defenders and their supporters must do the same. Conduct honest after-action reviews, reward candor, and implement changes quickly. Pretending that a defeat was just bad luck, or blaming the enemy's supposed cheating, only sets the stage for more disaster. These lessons are not just for generals. They apply in business, politics, and personal life. If we build systems that cannot adapt, if we ignore the warning signs, if we centralize authority so much that people on the ground cannot act, we court disaster. The collapse of Enron, for example, was not just about financial misdeeds, but about a culture that punished dissent and rewarded rigid conformity. The same principle applies to the fall of BlackBerry and the smartphone market. They failed to adapt and were overtaken by more flexible, innovative competitors. What practical steps can nations, organizations, and individuals take? Begin with scenario planning. Don't just plan for the expected, plan for the unexpected. Train for communication blackouts, for supply interruptions, for sudden morale shocks. Build teams that know how to improvise, not just follow checklists. Invest in psychological resilience. This means mental health support, open lines of communication, and visible leadership. In times of crisis, people need to hear from those at the top. Silence is deadly. Encourage honest feedback. Set up systems, whether military debriefs, business reviews, or even family meetings, where mistakes can be admitted and learned from without fear of reprisal. Diversify supply and communication networks. In war, this means multiple supply lines and redundant comms. In business, it means not relying on a single supplier or platform. Embrace technology, but prepare for its denial. If your entire defense or business relies on a single digital system, you are vulnerable to disruption. Reward initiative and adaptability. Celebrate those who find new solutions under pressure, who do not wait for permission to solve problems. As the world watches the aftermath of Chasiv Yar, the question becomes, who will learn these lessons, and who will fall into the same traps? History is filled with leaders who failed to adapt and paid the price, but it is also filled with those who, faced with disaster, changed course and emerged stronger. After the fall of Singapore in World War II, the British military re-evaluated its entire approach to defending its colonies, leading to eventual victories elsewhere. After the Tet Offensive, American commanders learned painful lessons about intelligence, morale, and the limits of firepower. For Ukraine, for its allies, and for adversaries watching from afar, the future now hinges on the willingness to absorb these lessons. Will planners stick to old doctrines, or will they invest in flexible, resilient systems? Will leaders empower those on the ground, or cling to control from afar? And for all of us, what comfort myths hold us back from facing reality? What fortresses have we built, at work, at home, in our own minds, that seem unbreakable but are built on clay? The fall of Chasiv Yar is a warning not just to armies, but to everyone who strives to defend what matters. Let this be a call to action. Question your assumptions, test your defenses, listen to those at the front lines, and prepare to adapt. Build not just walls, but networks. Nurture not just strength, but resilience. Only then will you stand a chance when the unexpected comes, because in the end, it always does. The legend of Chasiv Yar, like so many before it, will pass into history. What endures are the lessons written in blood and stone, lessons that must be learned or else paid for again and again. In the age of information, of drones and psychological warfare, of shifting alliances and rapid change, the true fortress is not a place. It is a mindset, one of vigilance, humility, and the will to adapt. That is the foundation that endures when all else falls away. And so, as the dust settles and the world wonders what comes next, the lesson is clear. The strongest fortress is the one that learns, adapts, and never stops questioning its own myths. That is how you survive. That is how you win, not just in war, but in life itself.